She mocked at an elderly woman for being broke, then found out who she really was. The laugh was loud enough to turn heads at the ATM line. It came from a young woman in a red dress, standing one spot behind an elderly woman who was taking longer than usual. Hello friends, before we start this story we would love to know where you're watching from. Tell us so we can give you a special hug in our next video. Like, comment and subscribe. The old woman didn't react. She stood there with her cards still in the machine, shoulders slightly curved forward, hands not as steady as they once were. Purple top. Long skirt. Shoes that looked worn but clean. She leaned closer to the screen as if that would help it cooperate. The red dress girl rolled her eyes, shifted her weight, and laughed again. People in line started pretending not to notice. A man checked his phone. A woman stared at the ceiling. Nobody wanted to be part of it. The screen beeped. The old woman pressed a few buttons slowly. Another beep. Then nothing. The red dress girl leaned back and laughed again, louder this time. She shook her head like this whole thing was a joke ruining her day. The old woman took her card out, looked at it, then slid it back in. Her hands shook a little more this time. She didn't turn around. She didn't say anything. She just tried again. This happened at a local bank branch in a quiet American town. One of those places where people still recognized faces, where most customers came in person instead of using apps. It was late morning. Not crowded, but enough people to form a short line. The girl in the red dress was named Madison. Early 20s. Always put together. Hair done. Nails done. The kind of confidence that came from never being told no. She had a habit of talking at people instead of to them. She worked nearby and came to this ATM often. The elderly woman's name was Eleanor. Most people didn't know that yet. She came to the bank every month on the same day, around the same time. She didn't use online banking. She liked seeing things printed. Liked knowing where her money was. That morning, something wasn't working. Madison checked her watch. She sighed loudly. She tapped her foot. Then she laughed again, muttering under her breath about people who shouldn't even be allowed near machines. Eleanor finally stepped back from the ATM and stared at the screen like it had personally disappointed her. She looked around, a little lost, then stepped to the side to let others pass. Her shoulders slumped as she did. Madison stepped forward immediately, still smirking, card already in her hand. As she passed Eleanor, she laughed again, this time turning her head just enough to make sure the message landed. Eleanor kept her eyes down. Madison finished her transaction in seconds. She walked away satisfied, like she'd won something. The moment was over. Or so it seemed. Eleanor stood there a few seconds longer, then slowly made her way inside the bank. Most people forgot about it by lunchtime. Madison definitely did. Weeks passed. Madison's life moved the way it always did. Busy, but full of opinions about everyone else. She didn't think of herself as cruel. Just honest. In her mind, people who couldn't keep up deserved to be reminded. Then one morning her own account wouldn't work. It started with a declined card at a coffee shop. She laughed it off, thinking it was a glitch. Tried again. Same result. The barista looked awkward. People behind her waited. Madison felt that familiar irritation rise. She paid with cash and left, already annoyed at the day. Later, she tried the ATM. Declined again. This time, her smile faded. She checked her balance on her phone. The app wouldn't load properly. She refreshed it. Nothing made sense. She went inside the bank. The line moved slowly. Too slowly. She crossed her arms and stared ahead, replaying the morning in her head. She needed access to her money. She had bills. Plans. Finally, she reached the counter. The teller typed, paused, then typed again. Her face changed slightly. Not panic. Not alarm. Just careful. Madison leaned forward, impatient. The teller explained there was an issue with her account. Nothing dangerous. Nothing permanent. But it needed approval from a manager. Madison exhaled sharply and leaned back. Of course it did. The teller gestured toward an office near the back and asked Madison to wait. Madison sat down, scrolling her phone, already annoyed at the inconvenience. Minutes passed. The office door opened. And out walked Eleanor. Same purple top. Same skirt. Hair neatly pulled back. Posture straighter than Madison remembered. Eyes focused. Madison stared, confused. Her brain tried to place her. Something felt off. Eleanor didn't look at Madison at first. She spoke quietly to the teller, nodded, then turned. That's when their eyes met. Eleanor recognized her immediately. Madison did too. Her stomach dropped. Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't frown either. She just looked at Madison the way people do when they already know everything they need to know. Madison stood up too fast. The chair scraped the floor. The teller introduced Eleanor as the branch manager. The words didn't sink in right away. Madison stood there blinking, replaying the memory of the ATM, the laugh, the eye roll. Eleanor was the woman she had mocked. Eleanor was the one who'd struggled at the machine. Eleanor was the one now in charge of whether Madison's problem got fixed quickly or not. Eleanor gestured for Madison to follow her into the office. The room was simple. Computer. No decorations meant to impress anyone. Madison sat down, suddenly very aware of her red dress, her posture, her tone. Eleanor reviewed the account quietly. She explained the issue in a clear, steady way. No judgment. No edge. Just facts. Madison nodded too much. She apologized quickly, her voice rushed, words tumbling over each other. She mentioned the ATM day without naming it, hoping Eleanor would understand what she meant. Eleanor listened. She didn't interrupt. When Madison finished, Eleanor nodded once. She fixed the issue. It took less than 5 minutes. Then Eleanor stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Madison stood too, unsure what to do next. She wanted to say more. To explain herself. To undo that moment weeks ago. Eleanor held the door open. As Madison walked past, Eleanor said something simple. Not harsh. Not kind either. Just calm. She reminded Madison that people carry stories others never see. That machines fail sometimes. That laughter lasts longer than embarrassment. Madison nodded, embarrassed, and left. For a few days, she was quiet. She told friends the story, but only parts of it. She laughed it off like an awkward coincidence. She said the old woman turned out to be important, like that was the surprising part. What she didn't say was how small she felt in that office. What she didn't admit was how often she replayed the ATM scene. But habits don't break easily. Weeks later, Madison was back to her usual self. Eye rolls. Judgment. She avoided that bank branch when she could, but she didn't change much else. The lesson brushed past her instead of settling in. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued her routine. Same hours. Same quiet presence. Same monthly visit to the ATM, even though she knew the machines inside and out. She still stood patiently. Still waited her turn. Still watched how people treated each other when they thought nobody important was watching. Because some people apologize when they're caught. Others only change when they understand. And Madison hadn't reached that part yet. Madison didn't stop being herself after that day at the bank. She slowed down for a short while, but slowing down isn't the same as changing. It just means waiting until the memory feels less uncomfortable. At first, she told herself the situation was rare. A weird coincidence. One of those stories people laugh about later. She focused on how quickly Eleanor had fixed the account problem, not on why the problem had even mattered so much to her in the first place. Life went back to normal. Madison still noticed who took too long in line. She still made faces when people fumbled with cards or asked too many questions. She still laughed when she thought someone looked out of place. She didn't think of it as cruelty. In her mind, it was commentary. Something she felt entitled to. What changed was her awareness. She became more careful about where she did it. She stopped mocking people inside banks. Grocery stores were still fair game. Coffee shops too. Anywhere she assumed power didn't exist. That's how pride works. It doesn't disappear. It just learns new hiding spots. A few months later, Madison moved to a slightly better apartment. New neighborhood. New routines. Different stores. Different faces. She liked the feeling of starting fresh, of being somewhere nobody knew her. One afternoon, she stopped by a small pharmacy to pick up a prescription. The line moved slowly. An elderly man at the counter kept checking his wallet, pulling out cards, putting them back, apologizing to the cashier again and again. Madison sighed. Loud enough. She shifted her weight and looked around like she was being inconvenienced on purpose. When the man dropped a few coins on the floor, she laughed under her breath and shook her head. The man knelt slowly to pick them up. It took him time. His knees protested. His hands weren't fast. Madison stepped around the coins and moved closer to the counter, clearly annoyed. Nobody said anything. The cashier finally finished the transaction. The man gathered his coins and left, shoulders tight, eyes down. Madison stepped forward, still irritated, and placed her items on the counter. She didn't think twice about the scene she just walked through. But something stayed with her this time. Not guilt. Not shame. Recognition. For a split second, she saw Eleanor in that man. The slow movements. The quiet effort. The way people around him pretended not to notice. The image annoyed her. She brushed it aside. Days later, something else happened. Madison ran into a problem at work. A mistake she didn't expect. A report filed wrong. Numbers that didn't line up. Nothing disastrous, but enough to get attention from management. She was called into a meeting. Asked to explain. Asked to wait. Waiting made her uncomfortable. Being uncertain made her restless. She sat there replaying the ATM day again, this time without trying to soften it. The laugh. The moment she chose embarrassment over patience. For the first time, she wondered how often she'd been the reason someone went home quieter than usual. The thought bothered her more than she liked. Still, she didn't act on it. Change requires humility, and Madison wasn't there yet. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued her life the same way she always had. She wasn't new to being underestimated. It had followed her for years. The slow walk. The older clothes. The preference for in-person banking. People assumed weakness where there was only age. She didn't correct them. She didn't need to. Eleanor had worked in finance most of her life. She'd seen markets crash and rebuild. She'd watched confident people lose everything and quiet ones hold steady. She'd learned early that respect revealed itself in small moments. How someone treated a stranger. How they behaved when nothing was at stake. That's why she used the ATM every month, even though she didn't need to. It reminded her how people acted when they thought nobody important was watching. Madison wasn't the first person to laugh. She wouldn't be the last. What made Madison stand out wasn't the laugh itself. It was the apology that came only after power was revealed. Eleanor thought about that often. Not with resentment, but with interest. Then one morning, Eleanor saw Madison again. Different location. Different setting. Same posture. It was at a community fundraiser held in a small hall near the bank. Eleanor attended as part of her job. Madison was there because her company sponsored part of the event. Madison didn't notice Eleanor at first. She stood near a table, talking loudly, gesturing, making comments about the setup, the food, the crowd. An elderly woman nearby struggled to open a water bottle. Madison glanced at her, smiled briefly, then turned away without helping. Eleanor watched from across the room. She wasn't angry. She wasn't disappointed. She was certain. Madison hadn't learned anything. Not really. Later that evening, Eleanor spoke on behalf of the bank. Short remarks. Clear points. Nothing flashy. She thanked volunteers, donors, staff. Madison noticed her halfway through. Her face changed. The confidence dipped. The memory rushed back. Eleanor finished speaking and stepped away. Their paths crossed near the exit. Madison nodded quickly. A tight smile. A polite greeting. Nothing more. Eleanor returned the nod and kept walking. No lecture. No reminder. Because some lessons don't stick the first time. Or the second. Sometimes they need repetition. That repetition came sooner than Madison expected. A year later, Madison's situation changed. Her job became unstable. A restructuring. A sudden shift. Promises that didn't materialize. She went from comfortable to cautious faster than she imagined. Bills stacked up. Savings thinned. Stress became constant. One afternoon, she stood in line at a different bank branch, trying to resolve another issue. This time, she was the one taking longer than expected. Her card didn't work. The teller explained something she didn't fully understand. She asked questions. She asked again. People behind her shifted. Sighed. Checked their phones. Madison felt it. That pressure she used to create for others. She felt the heat in her face. The urge to apologize for existing too long at a counter. She heard a quiet laugh behind her. Not loud. Not cruel. Just enough. Her stomach tightened. She turned slightly and saw a younger woman looking at her phone, smiling to herself. It wasn't even about Madison. But it felt like it was. That's when it clicked. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a simple realization. This is what it feels like. This is what she'd handed out so casually. Madison finished the transaction and walked out slower than usual. She sat in her car for a long time without starting the engine. She thought about Eleanor. Not as the manager. Not as the authority figure. As the woman at the ATM. The one who didn't say anything. Who didn't need to. Madison didn't become a saint after that day. She didn't transform overnight. But something shifted. She stopped laughing in lines. She stopped commenting on delays. She started stepping back instead of forward. Not because she feared consequences, but because she finally understood the weight of small actions. Months later, she returned to Eleanor's bank branch. Not for a problem. Just to open a new account. Eleanor wasn't there that day. Madison didn't ask for her. She didn't need to. The truth had already come out. Not about status or titles, but about character. And this time, it stayed. Subscribe for more stories.